Background: the following story is based off a real experience I had over 4 years ago. I am an aspiring writer and I hope to have some reactions and feedback to my story, so I hope you enjoy. The Fort. I remember almost everything about that weekend. I mean, who wouldn't? But what I remember is different than normal reminiscing. I can still smell the tunnels, see my dream, and feel the emotions that I had as soon as I laid eyes on the picture frame. It started like any other Boy Scout outing, cramped in a car with a kid that you barely knew, driving for multiple hours without being allowed to use your phone, and an adult chaperone who wanted to be there even less than you did. But I was actually excited about this outing for no other reason than where we were staying. I had lived a few hours from Detroit my entire life, and despite frequent trips, I still felt like I had never truly seen the city. My mind was wandering when they announced to the troops that we were going to stay overnight in the barracks of the historic Fort Wayne. I knew what the word fort meant in the context of pillows and blankets, but I had never seen a military one like it before. Before we even pulled into the parking lot, I could already tell that this was going to be the most fun I had ever had with my troops. Before we could even park the car, you could see cannons, tanks, all the guns, bullets and ammo on display all over the fort entrance walls. To a 12-year-old, this was exciting. My mind ignored any historical relevance for pictures of cannons firing and tanks rolling over the hills. We were all inside and settled. An old man with a long beard who looked like he had never done anything except to give the same tour greeted us with a short monologue about the historical importance of the fort, as well as giving us some rules about the preservation of the fort. He also listed a few areas that were not to be explored without an adult present, mostly the tunnels. At the mention of the word tunnels, I was at the edge of my seat, my excitement barely contained. I listened in awe as the old man explained that there were hundreds of feet of tunnels buried underneath the dirt mounds that created the walls of the fort. The only thing on my mind heading to bed that night was the thought of those tunnels, how badly I wanted to see and explore them. Little did I know, the next day I would get my wish, but with a sinister ending. The dream I had that night was so vivid, I could have sworn I was watching a movie. The dream started off normal, soldiers marching, pitching tents, marching with their weaponry, and saluting to their superiors. But then, a rain of artillery began raining from the heavens as the result of an unknown enemy. Men were immediately killed, their body parts blown apart and strewn across the yard so that it seemed it was impossible to find what belonged to who. The cannons and bullets continued to rain down as the soldiers in the yard ran for cover, eventually pouring in mass into the tunnels, with the final soldier being commander and the one to shut the large gates protecting his men. I woke up in a sweat, alarmed at the grotesque nature of my dream and the pain that I could feel for my imaginary soldiers. I comforted myself in knowing that what I saw was only just a dream. In addition to being historically inaccurate, the fort we were staying in never saw any combat like that kind that I saw in my dream, and therefore a mass death never really happened. On the tour of the surrounding area the next day, I pointed out to the old man that we were passing multiple fenced-off areas of dirt and hills, each only being about as long and wide as a semi-truck. The guide informed me that the fort was constructed on native land, and the mounds that were fenced off were ancient burial sites where the tribes that lived here would bury their dead. That answer was satisfactory to me, But the old man continued. He said that the tribes that lived here told the original builders of the fort that they could not have the land before they were even asked for it. That apparently, according to legend, the native elders had seen the construction of the fort and the seizure of their land in a dream. This struck me as odd. The tunnels. That afternoon we were given free time, so I immediately ran over to my only real friend in the troop, Ethan. Ethan and I talked about what we had seen that day. We looked over the walls at the passing boats on the river, but were quickly bored. The only thing that interested us were the tunnels, so we did what 12-year-old boys would do, and we snuck inside. It wasn't exactly a daring maneuver. The entrance to the tunnels was out of sight of everyone else. The doors were too heavy to open and close every day, so they permanently remained open. We were fully prepared to accept the consequences of being caught if it meant we could explore the tunnels. Just stepping inside the tunnels and taking my first breath reminded me of my dream. It had the stench of rust, wet stone, and old leather. Ethan and I made it down the first hallway and were presented with a fork in the path. The left side led straight against the wall with a small ammo room at the end, resulting in a dead end, while the right side had a staircase that led down into more storage and utility-based tunnels. Being the adventurers we were, we went down. The tunnel now separated into 6 or 7 rooms that were all barely large enough to fit a refrigerator. We were insistent on exploring every one of these empty rooms for no other reason than to satisfy our curiosity. But as I entered the final room at the end of the tunnel, inspected it, and turned around, Ethan was nowhere to be found. I glanced inside each of the other rooms to see if he was there, but he had just vanished. Just then, I heard a voice from the entrance of the tunnels proclaiming that it was time for dinner and everyone was to report back to the yard. I had just seen Ethan seconds prior to his disappearance, so I figured he went back up the stone steps to explore the second tunnel on the left. So I swiftly raced up and down the other tunnel. As soon as I turned the corner, I saw him, but he was odd, walking slowly towards the ammo room, walking almost like he was asleep. Ethan made his way towards the ammo room and stepped inside. I chased after him, calling his name, believing him to be playing a prank on me. I called after him again and again, and eventually, running full speed, I entered the ammo room, the empty ammo room. I was in shock. Was I dehydrated? Going crazy? I found myself spinning in circles, crouching to look in the corners, as if I would see him there shrunken down. At least that would explain where he went. But he was just gone. I feared the worst, not really knowing what the worst was, and I decided I need to get an adult. I once again ran full speed back to the entrance to the tunnels. I saw the silhouette of the voice that had called to me earlier. As I approached the entrance of the tunnel, I was able to make out a face. It was Ethan. Ethan told me it was time for dinner. I asked him where he went. He said that he got scared and left the tunnels after about 2 minutes, but I was in there for more than 5. I asked him what the last thing he said to me was, where exactly he went, any information he could give me that could explain what I had just seen in there. But all of his answers went to the same conclusion. It was impossible. The picture. All throughout dinner in the evening, my mind tried to explain what I had seen. Who did I see in the tunnels? Where did they go? How was Ethan in 2 places at once? My panic was temporarily set aside when the old man visited us once again. With him, he brought a large brown cardboard box filled with framed pictures of all the army battalions that had once served here. He also brought with him a number of death certificates for soldiers that had been killed while in the fort. One was killed by a cannon misfire, a couple by heart attacks, others choked, but one had been killed by an accidental fire in the ammo room. Once I realized this box might have contained an answer for me, I paid much closer attention to its contents. An old picture in a heavy metal frame was passed to me, and I looked at it and was incredibly scared at what I saw. The uniforms the soldiers were wearing were almost identical in color and shape to the uniforms us as Boy Scouts wore. I asked the old man who they were, and he told me that they were the last group of soldiers to ever work at the fort before it was shut down. He pointed at one of the men in the picture and told me that he was the one that had died due to the fire in the ammo room. And at that point I knew, as I gazed into the photo and looked at the young soldier who was the spitting image of Ethan, that I had seen a spirit. I have not been to Fort Wayne since. My mom bought the house when I was in second grade. It was built in 1856 or 1857. I'm not entirely sure. The guy who built it was a prominent doctor. He had a few kids and I don't know a whole lot about him. But I know over the years a couple of people died there, mostly him and his kids. But we got the house because of the woman who was living there. Her sister died and she wanted to move into a nursing home. As far as I know, the house was not used to treat patients. There was a hospital built maybe 80 yards from us, where I am fairly sure he did most of his work. I know that place is very haunted, but nothing too malicious. Anyways, I feel like that's enough background about the house. We lived there in the early 2000s. I was 6 or 7 and we moved out when I was 13. We didn't live there for a very long time because the house just seemed to be bad luck. We had a dog named Snowball. He was an American Eskimo dog, 20 pounds, fluffy, and white as snow. He would just stay in the dark corners a lot, as would my cat. I'd hear my mom call for me a lot, but when I went to look for her, she wasn't home from work yet or hadn't called me. A few times we would be in the kitchen or living room and we would hear something digging through my shoe boxes full of Polly Pockets. My bedroom was directly above the living room and the floor was thin. When we would go upstairs to look for the cat or dog, they were usually there in the living room with us. The cat liked to stay under the couch, but when we would investigate, all my dolls and accessories would be thrown about my room, and the door was closed. Snowball liked to chew on my dolls as he had a gum disease, and I guess it felt good. But he really didn't like being alone, and his favorite spot was on the green couch where he could look out and watch the street. He was also old and only went upstairs when it was cold and would fall asleep in one room as he liked the heater. As did my cat. She was often very close to us as she liked the spot on the red couch where she could watch TV. None of the pets liked going upstairs unless we were there. I spent a lot of time outside, but I also liked to sit in the office and I would play Neopets or RuneScape and watch videos on various sites. I'd feel like someone was watching me all the time. I'd turn around and realized I was alone. Sometimes when I was outside and my mom was still at work, in her bedroom window, I'd see a man looking down at me, but I don't remember being afraid of him. Just used to seeing him. Mom always said it was just Dr. Green. I'd wave to him and he would just vanish. One night, I woke up when I saw someone sitting on my bed, and it was freezing as they were pulling my blanket down. I woke up mad, then panicked because pulling at my blanket was the man in the window. Then I could smell it. Something was burning. I woke my mom up, and we found that the microwave was shorting out and had burned through the cable and was on the verge of catching fire. After that, I made my grandmom take me to his grave, and I'd leave flowers for him all the time. Dr. Green was a nice ghost. He would just appear, and he woke me that one time. Then there was Luke. Luke was malicious. He terrorized the pets, and it's why they wouldn't really go upstairs. He always appeared in dark corners, and I could never bring myself to walk past him. It felt like if I did, something bad would happen. He was more active too. Cabinets would fly open, things would fall off shelves, and he would throw things at us. In the dead of night, you could hear heavy boots slowly climb the stairs. Sometimes the TV would randomly flip channels. You would hear groans, and he actually attacked us. I regularly had nightmares and would wake up with strange bruises, cuts, and scratch marks. This was also happening to my mom. We knew his name was Luke because my mom used to record QVC from this sewing channel on the VCR. I think it was on QVC as they were doing some craft thing, and they asked the caller what their name was, and very clearly, in a masculine voice, someone says, "Luke." Then the woman who called and was live on the show goes on to say her name and go on about the product. We were only guessing that the friendly ghost was Dr. Green, as the man always appeared in similar clothing to the photos we had of him. Very nice suits and a hat. Luke, however, was dressed in ratty-looking clothing, and he wore huge boots with spurs. I can still hear his boots clanging up those squeaky steps. Lastly, there was the ghost dog. I love animals, but I hated this dog. It was huge, black, and made me feel sick to my stomach when it would appear. It also appeared everywhere, outside, the carport, downstairs, upstairs, and especially the cellar. I could hear its toenails clack on the hard wood, and I would hide under my blankets. The hair on my arms and neck would raise, and I could hear it sniffing me. It makes my skin crawl to think about that dog. If you looked at it, it would growl and vanish. But I only saw it maybe twice. I heard it all the time though. I'd also have nightmares about this huge black dog following me around. It was a recurring dream that scared me so much as a kid. I'd be in the yard, and there was a creek that ran through our yard. It went under the road, and there were those huge steel cylinders that let the water pass. I could crouch and walk through them, but I'd see the dog there as it was guarding what looked like a kid's body. It would immediately wake me up. I never thought to look up and see if a kid had died there. I was a kid, and it scared me to think about it. But I still see that dream vividly. I own a big black lab mixed with Great Dane, and sometimes he gives me flashbacks to that dog. I could go on and on about odd things that happened. More happened to my mom, and she has weird pictures, videos, and even called the priest to cleanse the house. But I don't think it ever helped. It may have, but the people who live there now have fixed up the house a lot. I've been tempted to knock on the door and ask them, but I feel like that would be weird. I drive past the house every time I go visit my grandparents. Also, stepping back on the property makes me feel uneasy. When we were moving out, I was packing my things. Something knocked over my corkboard, and I was frustrated as it broke. I told whatever it was to leave me alone and that I was leaving. Then I heard something behind me clearly say, "If you come back, I'll kill you." I don't want to take my chances with the paranormal. With a threat like that, I don't want to mess with it, especially as this was a voice that was very different from Luke's. It hissed, made me feel sick, and made the room very cold as well.